I don't know if it's Yvonne or Mark who's going to go.
Yvonne, I hope.
Yvonne.
I like that. Well, we met last week and we've been working off of a document outline that Scott has provided for us, which is awesome. And we have 14 different challenges that we talked about related to adoption. Some of them we sort of think might all be under one thing. One was access, basically just not being able to get online in terms of adoption. And then we had this whole kind of subgroup of different items that we think might sort of go under one heading, which is about community members not trusting government programs, not feeling that it's going to positively impact them, that there's, that it's not going to bring value to their lives to be on the internet. So we had kind of pieces of that, like, what do we know about those non-adoption regions? Is there any data about the economic cost of having a percentage of the population that doesn't want to get online, that kind of stuff? Another challenge we identified was language barriers. We added a little bit of data about that. Comfort with hardware and software, for example, digital literacy. Not knowing about options for providers in their area was one, and we sort of talked a little bit about the broadband map that we have and how that might not be the easy way for the average person to find out, if there's a provider in their area, and some barriers that might be there. We talked about not having adaptive devices or not knowing about them, especially folks who maybe have temporary disabilities or disabilities that have come on with age. Let's see what else we have here. Lack of leadership in areas that could help with adoption. This was one that Mark brought up, not having a statewide leadership in education technology. This was a recommendation that we had last year. And then smaller communities not having enough capacity to follow up on opportunities, which sort of ties with what we were hearing again today about having capacity in the communities. And then lack of reliability, reliable internet, not just having it, but having it work, all the time when you need it. Only 1 in 7 Minnesotans reported having, 1 in 7 Minnesotans reported not having reliable internet during the pandemic. I thought that was kind of an interesting factoid we found. We identified 5 different challenges related to affordability, and then started crafting some recommendations. I'm not sure if you want me to read through all of those, but we had 8 different accessibility recommendations to address the issues that I was just talking about, and 3 different affordability recommendations. So let me know if you want me to read through those in terms of the discussion. I also can just give you the link to the document where we've got all of these outlined.
Yeah, I think, Yvonne, if you could share the link in the document in the chat, that'd be good.
There you go.
You already have that, but maybe just quickly walk through them. I think that'd be good.
Sure. So continuing with so that first set that I just was going through were related to accessibility, and then in terms of affordability, there's lots of models for enhancing affordability, but perhaps information about them isn't readily available to community leaders. Sorry, I live across from a hospital, and if you can hear the helicopter, it's a constant part of my day now. Let's see, and not knowing about the federal ACP program was another challenge in terms of affordability, not knowing about affordability programs from their providers, not being able to afford a device at home or an up-to-date device. I was just talking to somebody the other day who's got a 10-year-old computer and is trying to get it to work with things. And then the disparity in cost between broadband services in rural areas versus urban areas. This was something bringing up related, especially to school districts, having there be a different amount that it costs to actually get that broadband in, even though the funding is per pupil. So those were some of the challenges that we identified. And then in terms of recommendations, we're starting to put together some ideas in terms of adoption, trying to provide a way for people to make sure that they can find who their providers are that are available to them and quickly, get that pricing and stuff. Providing a way for people after checking with providers find that they don't actually have access to report that back. And we have one way to do that through the map, but it might not be something, again, that's real easy for folks to find. We have a whole section on personal help, the digital navigator idea, having folks that connect with other people. And then we listed different programs that are doing that right now. How can we highlight those? How can we support them? How can we extend those? We talked a little bit about instructional videos, especially things in multiple languages, knowing that lots of folks are online and using videos for learning about things. Talked a little bit about digital materials, and all of that might just fall into, you know, kind of more funding for the folks who are already doing this stuff, not that we would propose that the OBD start making that stuff. Establishing and funding a position within the MDE was part of our recommendations last year. We wanted to be sure and bring that up again. And last year's recommendation about funding fellows to work in the rural communities to help with that capacity problem. We want to bring that again in some way. And then the whole reliability thing, you know, like what are some funding or other options we can think of in terms of helping with that reliability issue. And then in terms of affordability, was, you know, some resources in terms of helping to prepare materials that will help communities to communicate with folks about options that they have, writing grants to help expand programs that go into people's homes and help them get online. And then again, the recommendation from last year about funding fellows to go into the rural communities to help bridge the gaps that the rural communities are saying that they have. So quick read through.
That's really good. And I was sharing the document while you had it up, so that was really helpful. Questions, comments from the task force?
In their list, they have the actual devices like laptops and stuff. What about the premise devices for when they get in? So keeping those current so that you can use the speeds that your provider is able. That if you went back into the list, they just list like the access devices. They didn't actually list the premise device here. And I think that should be included in there.
This is Mark, also part of that subgroup. We did have a discussion about that, from a reliability standpoint, in terms of what of that is the result of a, 10-year-old router or a 15-year-old device, right? Is that what you're talking about, Micah? That, that they're using as their,
But another component to that, in looking at when people are buying, giving them education, so they know, like, if you're going to be, can we talk about usability?
mm-hmm.
If I'm going to be using it for gaming, which I know people say gaming is, it should be looking at, it's actually becoming an industry now that we need to be looking at. So then you start looking at the different types of routers and that education component. So it's not just having a router, but
Sure.
How are you going to use that router? What is the service you're looking at doing?
Got it.
One thing that's a hot topic is the whole students taking computer science classes in Minnesota. Like when they ranked it across the nation, like Minnesota was last,
Yes.
right? And you addressed it somewhere in here, but I wonder if there's, one of the ways to leapfrog is, yes, you could have computer science classes in every single classroom, but that takes teachers and certifications, and that may take some time, right? So is there a way to even be able to offer classes online, right? So if a school does not offer that at a school, is there something where it's offered online through another school or something like that? And I wonder if maybe not a recommendation, but an example of how you could creatively use broadband in a way to try and bring that.
And then we actually do that all the time. So
Right.
Yeah. Perfect.
Because of all curriculums, that would be one that could go online, right? So,
Right.
yeah.
And right now, that's what students are doing to fill the gap when they don't get what they need from the school, is they go online and they take classes online and they watch videos to learn how to do stuff.
Yeah.
I experienced that at the university where I had students that, they didn't have any classes on digital marketing that covered things like running Google ads. And I'd have students go online and just take online courses.
But if the state thinks about it, I mean, at least the legislator, there could be a way to make this more formalized, and then that way it does count towards your credits. It's, you know, obviously people could do it on the side, but really make it more official. I think that'd be.
One of the things that that I noticed kind of gets in the way, both at the school district level and at the university level, when the university or the schools have a contractual agreement with Microsoft, then they are not allowed to teach Google tools and vice versa. And that can really tie the hands of the professors. I experienced it myself, and I've talked to professors who and high school teachers that experienced this, where they can't teach the other thing because of this contract.
There's a contract in place, yeah.
Right, but yet it's the thing that the student really needs in order to succeed at the thing they want to do in their life.
Yeah. Thoughts, comments from others?
Yvonne, you had mentioned the Affordable Connectivity Program and increasing awareness of it.
Mm-hmm.
And we also kind of heard about people needing to set up their own connections. It might be interesting to look at a digital navigator's model to connect those.
Mm-hmm.
One of the, you had also noted on, lack of trust in government programs. When you can have somebody in your community you already trust come in, make sure your network is set up correctly, get you registered for the ACP, teach you some of those basic digital skills to get you online, you can combine a few of those issues in one delivery to knock out some of those barriers.
Yeah, we have digital navigators as one of our recommendations. And specifically, we made a recommendation last year that, I really hope we'll include in our recommendations again this year, to work with a program that brings young people who live in the community, who grew up in the community, who've left, brings them back to the community as, workers that work as a fellow in that community. I think that's a really cool way to accomplish some of that. Really does get into, some hand holding and the personal connections and stuff. I've seen that myself many times.
But even the example that we heard earlier from Sunrise, I mean, we do need
Right.
that sort of quarterback, right? That sort of they can play together, the township nods their heads. I mean, that's not an easy. It doesn't just naturally happen, right? And in this specific case, it was a manufacturer that had an interest, so they played that role, but that's not the same everywhere.
Many times you have the one tech guy or the one tech woman in the community who really kind of knows computer stuff, and they get all the phone calls to come and help with that sort of thing. Then you can burn that person out, or they don't have the capacity,
Yeah. For other task force members, or is there anything in the recommendation or the challenges, the recommendations you saw that you have any heartburn with, or something long or anything like that? And obviously, as we formalize it, you'll see it better probably in the next meeting, but good stuff here. Okay. Well, I'm not seeing any questions or any other comments here. Nice job there. I think there's a lot of content there, so there'll be a lot of interesting things to put in the report with some examples as well. So that's really nice. That's good. So great job there, subgroup. Okay, moving on to the next one, funding, mapping, and usage. I know there's been several activities there as well. So with that, Steve, maybe I'll turn it over to you.
Sure. I'm going to try and share here.
Okay.
So our group met on the 5th, and we used the outline, challenges, and recommendations document. We had some discussion. We also focused on updating the numbers that were asked for in the last task force meeting, and I'll get to our chart here in a minute. But the challenges we came up with on funding, one related to mapping, is that the number of locations has increased because the way we're counting is a little bit different. We're now looking at habitable locations, not just primary residences, as I understand it. And that's in part as people are living in more than one place. They don't have one residence. They may have several, and we're trying to count each of those as a location to be served. Increased costs, the per pass costs are expected to be higher, and I'll get into that more in a minute with our chart. The loss of RDOF funding reduced the federal investment for RDOF anyway, and I don't think we know if that's going to be redistributed to Minnesota or if it's going to go somewhere else. The uncertainty of FCC mapping creates some uncertainty in what Minnesota's going to get. The BEAD funding that we talked about earlier, for example, we get the $100 million guaranteed, but then there's extra money depending on the number of unserved locations. So that mapping will have an effect on what Minnesota gets. Permitting costs in Minnesota increases, and this increases delays, and this needs to be addressed to help meet the goals of connectivity and minimize the increasing costs. On challenges for mapping, these are a little bit related here. Improved mapping likely to increase the number of recognized unserved locations, so we may get even more locations that are listed. Ability to challenge mapping. So folks can go and say, hey, I don't have that speed, or map isn't accurate. It's a challenge to get that word out, I think, and have people take the steps they need to get the maps corrected. There's a procedure, it's just people have to be able to do it, they have to know to do it, care to take the time to do it. And I think the OBD is going to have, the challenge of processing those, or FCC, depending on where that goes. There's continued efforts to improve and update mapping. New contract with Connected Nations is up and running. And I have a note of communication with counties, but I don't know why we have that note. Someone can remind me, that's fine. I don't remember what that one meant. And new FCC maps are expected by January 2023. So we should have some information early next year. If it's not, I'm kind of thinking January won't be the date, but I don't know, just the way things go. Recommendations that came out of our group. First, our group talked about going to the reference speed of 100 by 20. We are already at 2022, so the old goal is passed. At this point, we are at the 2026 goal, the way I understand that system to work. So it simplifies things for us in that we don't have to produce two sets of numbers, but also means the goalpost changed a little bit. Providers are largely already meeting that, so I don't know that it affects much of what they're doing. But I think everything, our group, the group that met, suggested we just move towards 100 by 20 at this point. And next one, annual investment-based funding and investment of federal recovery funds. This is getting certainty of annual investment, so that we don't have to go fight each year and try to get something from the legislature, that there's something that is expected in the base budget. No real change will occur in Minnesota without a change to current broadband statute. This seeks to eliminate the $5 million cap and what projects can be addressed, and as a catch-up to lost years of construction. Next one, who will be included? This might be more of a challenge than a recommendation. Who will be included in the development of the 5-year plan required by NTIA for future funding? Some states have already received approval, and they'll get funding before Minnesota. Last year, legislature has to recognize federal funding alone will not get Minnesota to the finish line. The appropriation last year, the legislature put money into it, but it was from federal funds, so they didn't use state funds despite having a surplus and the ability to do that. Mapping recommendations, process or resources for map challenges, I think, and we mentioned that as one of the challenges, but also recommendation would be tell people how to address these things. And I don't think we'll know that until FCC gives us some certainty of what the maps are. Engagement with communities, counties, townships, or regions, so they're prepared for the challenge period with the FCC and related to mapping. Don't know if this will be OBD or directly with FCC. Those are the challenges and recommendations we had. I'm going to switch to the chart, and this is a familiar chart. This is something that we've produced in the past and published, and I guess Deed asked for an updated version of this. Trying to increase the size of it. This may be hard to see for people. All right, if folks can't see it, tell me and I'll try to increase the zoom some more, but it's the same structure we've had before. We have our unserved households, which went up to 202. The average cost of construction, we have it at 9,500. Total cost is the line 4 there. One of the questions we had as a subgroup was, what's the right per pass number? So we've reached out to some groups, and Brian helped with this. Brent Christensen sent some stuff over. Dave Wolf had some information. Anna Boroff with the cable providers they're trying to get some information too, but we're trying to figure out what's the right number per pass. Kind of the summary here is a little bit to the right. It's covered by my Zoom screen here. It looks like the per pass numbers all fall about 7,400, but some of those are without connections. At least Brent's numbers about 7,500 without service line drops, and the others I don't know if those included service line drops or not. Brian, you may be able to comment on the NRTC one there.
Yes, Steve, I do not believe that it did. So I think they're pretty comparable to what Brent had. Thanks.
Okay. So as a number, I've gone a little bit conservative, and this can change in any way you guys want. I've just done 9,500 as a per pass number. It doesn't relate to the take rate. It just relates to passing habitable locations, based on the numbers we received on the other side. This breaks down the federal funding. I still need some updated numbers on this. The IIJ numbers I just added here, at least 100 million. And I think we can hope for a little bit more than the bare minimum. As a bigger state, more land to cover. Our bottom numbers, I think, are not realistic right now because we're going to have to take out some federal funding. But that's what we have right now. So I guess to the group, what do folks want to use for the average cost for connection?
We're not seeing numbers that high in our project, but maybe we're an anomaly too.
What are you seeing?
Well, in our recent applications, we're low 8,000, high 6,000, depending on the project. But again, we have different economies of scale, how we do it. But it's a safe number. I'm not going to exceed that unless there's a lot of rock.
The argument there would be the harder to get areas would be more expensive, right?
They'll be harder to get, plus there's the pilot program to increase the state share. We're not at a strict 50% because of the pilot program. So that affects that number, but I don't think we have an average or anything to reflect the state share. So this is without the pilot program. I guess these numbers are without the higher cost share pilot program.
Say, Teddy, Anna has a chat message for everyone.
How long ago was that? You asked about the question in the chat? Yeah. The question in the chat was the last amount The last per passing amount was calculated by the Office of Broadband Mill based on applications received. Do they have the list of that number? Maybe that would also be with an average. And then Diane says OBD can calculate a number if the task force provides the parameters.
Okay, well, for now, do we want to leave the 9,500? Do we want to go down to the 7,500? Somewhere in between?
Safer number because you're hedging against inflation. If you're starting a greenfield today with no inventory on hand, yeah, you're going to be getting up there.
I was gonna say, the inventory discussion was part of our subgroup too. I don't know if that's gonna come.
Well, I think we can stick with that as long as we have the talking points. We can always change that in the write-up, right?
Yep.
But just walking through the numbers, 2 billion is what's required. Half of that, well, close to 1.9 billion. 959 million would be, at least at the 50% would be the state's share. Divide that by 4 across the 4 years, that's annually 240 million.
Mm-hmm.
And then obviously there's some of the federal funding, although we only have the $100 million in there for the infrastructure piece.
We do.
More. Yeah, it'd be more, right? So that, depending on what that is, changes what the state needs are.
Yep. And then, Tom, what was the deployment window for money? Was that up to 2026 or?
It's gonna be 12.6 plus 4, so that'll put us at, where are we, 2022 now, so, yeah, 2026.
Okay, so those happen to line up.
Okay, so something every year for 4 years.
Okay, so we'll leave that number. I'm gonna try and update the federal funds numbers. Anybody who has numbers, I'm happy to get help with that. And then we'll come up with a number in the end here that's the state's biennial share, and get that in.
Okay. Yep. Seems like a good approach. Any questions on that approach or concerns? There's a question in the chat that says, do you have the cost for the 100 by 20?
I don't know if these numbers are 100 by 20 numbers. My memory from most of the providers is that they're meeting the 100 by 20 anyway. So my guess is that they are. Or at least in large part, Brian.
Is there a number of unserved households represented in this chart based on the 25 by 3 or the 100 by 20? Maybe that's what.
This is the number, the 100 by 20. Okay. Because 25 by 3 was 173,000.
Yep, that's what I thought. That the title of the thing maybe makes it unclear.
Now that, to Steve's point earlier, that number might change depending on the new FCC maps.
Right. Now it's better.
Now
You should probably update the year for the goal too.
Yep.
Go ahead, Steve.
I'm just thinking that, we're supposed to be looking at unserved areas. And wouldn't it make sense to take a look at the map and identify those locations and get some actual connections or per location costs from those areas, since they're going to be the primary focus? Because I know up in northeastern or northern Minnesota, there's a 25% add-on for rock boring, and I'm not sure if that's reflected in some of the numbers that we're looking at. So just a thought that might be wise to identify some of those regions that are supposedly going to be the primary focus and make sure we have accurate numbers for that.
Yeah, I think it makes sense to validate that. Part of the 9,500 for me was comfortable is because of that part of it, right? it's about 25%. But let's yeah, that's a good idea. Let's maybe validate with one or two providers from those sort of hard to reach areas. Brian?
Yeah, maybe to tag team off that, I think if you look at a baseline, this is the information that we've gotten from Brent, and it's deploying system construction season isn't over this year. That's kind of what we're seeing. The NRTC one is just kind of an average of about 70 electric co-ops that are deploying across the country, including Minnesota. But I think for Scott, it wouldn't be a bad idea just to reference these are areas that are on average construction. We're going into areas of lower density on the unserved and the challenging areas. That's why they don't have service. Because I know in our area, you're probably looking at closer to $15,000 just because of the rocks and the terrain. So I think that would be a good reference in the report that we can just kind of reference. But I think that the big thing that we seen when Steve brought the committee together is we were using a number that was closer to $5,000 or $5,400 from all the way back in 2018, that we really needed to reflect that, hey, the bar has been risen considerably just because of the cost pressure. So it's a movement in the right direction that I think that we're heading.
Good. Other questions? And the other, not only on the numbers, but concerns on the recommendation. I saw that one around the $5 million cap to remove that, right? I think everybody's aligned on that unless you have issues.
Yeah, so these are just the recommendations from the subgroup. So if there's changes that folks want to make on that, that's fine too.
Will you be able to distribute that?
I think we can.
To us?
Scott's nodding his head, so.
Just give us a chance to look at it more.
Sure.
Well, and I think that in the next pass, we will start to put all this together, right? Yeah. And there'll be a major recommendation, so. Okay, other questions, comments, or concerns? Okay, I'm not seeing any, so thank you, Steve, really appreciate that. And again, I think this is starting to come together, and good that we had this discussion, had more time for us, so we were sort of on the same page. I do agree the next piece is start to bring it together. So that's actually a good transition to the next topic, which is really just, okay, what are next steps? And Scott, I'll turn it over to you here, just give us some thoughts of how this come together. But from my perspective, obviously we have some of the starting challenges and recommendations. We'll start to put a document together, and then our next meeting starts to potentially look at a draft, if we can. And then, but it'll be very draft, and then we have a whole month into December to be able to get it right. But what are your thoughts on that?
There are a couple of additional subgroup meetings scheduled, so we'll go through those and consolidate all of the information that we have so far into the first report draft, which will get distributed before the next full group meeting, and then we'll be able to chew on it and start. It'll look very similar to the format from last year, where we numbered the challenges and correlated them to the recommendations for each of the areas. It'll be easy to map.
Yeah, so our next meeting, which is in the latter part of November, although that date might move, we'll kind of find out quickly about that one, or mid-November. But the idea would be that we would have something to look at, and then again, it'll be draft, so it'll be a good opportunity for us to discuss, see where we are, see what additional changes we need to make, or updates need to be made to the documents. Then that will tell us whether in December one meeting will suffice, or maybe we'll have a couple smaller 1-hour meetings or whatever to kind of fine-tune things. And then we vote on it at our meeting in December, and then we circulate it around. So
I'd like to ask, make a request again for any new photographs you did a great job last year, Dave, helping us out, and anybody else, Teresa, you sent me some, we'd like to update those, so if we've got new content that we can add to the report to freshen it up, that'd be great. Just email me whatever you've got that represents any of the challenges, new installations, et cetera, that point to the work that you've done over the last year.
Will do.
Thank you.
Okay. So that's all the topics we had for today. Good discussion, some good presentations. I think they give us some more information that we can put in the report as examples as well. Thank you for arranging some of the speaker things. It was great. And Tom, thank you for being here with us. So, any other topics, questions, comments, concerns from anyone on the task force?
I'd like to give a shout out to Joe Weiler. I think he was on from CTC. They've received one of the largest federal grants in the state of Minnesota history with sport. It's going to be a real boom for northeastern Minnesota, covering a great expanse around Lake Vermilion all the way up to. So fantastic work by the department.
Awesome. I think Joe's still on. I still see him on, so thank you, Steve, for that. Any other questions or comments from anybody else, other non-task force members? Open time. All right, I'm not seeing any hands go up or anybody coming off mute, at least at the moment. So with that, I want to thank everybody for your time today and working through the hybrid model. For those of you online, have a good rest of the day. For those of you here, there's lunch provided, so spend some time lunch here together. So with that, thanks everyone and have a good rest of the day.
You too.
Thank you.